Imagine buying a ticket to see the greatest player in women's basketball. You drive to the arena, you park your car, you buy a jersey at the merchandise stand, you grab a drink, you find your seat, and then 1 hour before tip-off, someone tells you she's not playing. Not injured last night. Not listed as questionable this morning. Just quietly, suddenly unavailable. Your money is already gone. The ticket is scanned. The jersey is in your hands. The parking receipt is in your pocket. And the Indiana Fever front office knew this moment was coming long before you ever left your house. That is not a scheduling mishap. That is not an administrative oversight. That is a calculated sequence of events that put revenue collection ahead of basic honesty, and the people running this league are no longer looking the other way. What has been unraveling in Indianapolis over the past several weeks is unlike anything women's professional basketball has seen, and the story is only now reaching its most consequential chapter. The Indiana Fever did not just miss a deadline. They walked into a situation with their eyes open, made a series of public statements that directly contradicted each other, caught the whole thing on camera, and then had the audacity to respond to accountability questions with 2 words and a dismissive tone that will likely define this entire episode for years to come. So let's slow this down, because every layer of this story matters, and the further you go, the worse it gets. Start with the foundation. The WNBA's collective bargaining agreement contains a reporting requirement that is not ambiguous, not flexible, and not subject to interpretation based on how important your player is or how much money is on the line. Every franchise must submit complete injury, illness, and rest designations to the league office by 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the day before any scheduled game. The rule exists for 3 distinct reasons, and each one carries real institutional weight. First, legal sports betting markets price player availability directly into their lines. When a star player is out, the lines move. When bettors and operators don't have that information in time, the integrity of those markets is compromised, and the WNBA has commercial partnerships with those betting operators that depend entirely on the league holding up its end of the credibility bargain. Second, fans make real decisions based on roster information. They book travel. They take time off work. They buy tickets and merchandise and parking passes based on the belief that the product they were sold is the product they're going to get. Third, the league's institutional reputation depends on it operating like a professionally administered organization, one that respects its own rules consistently and applies them without exception. There is one carve-out in the CBA, one narrow exemption, and it applies only to the second night of a back-to-back schedule. The Portland Fire game was not the second night of a back-to-back. There was no exemption available. The 5 o'clock deadline came and went, and the Indiana Fever submitted nothing. No injury designation. No rest designation. No communication of any kind to indicate that Caitlin Clark, the most commercially significant player in WNBA history, would not be suiting up. Instead, fans found out approximately 1 hour before tip-off. Think about that timeline carefully. By the time the announcement came, people had already entered the building. Tickets had been scanned. The moment that scan happens, a ticket becomes non-refundable. Merchandise transactions had already been completed. Concession revenue was already in the register. Parking money had already changed hands. The announcement didn't reach fans in time for any of them to make a different decision with their money. Every single financial transaction had already been processed before the information became public. That is the sequence the league's investigation will be built around, because that sequence is either a coincidence or it isn't. Now here is where this story takes a turn from a simple reporting violation into something that investigators and lawyers look at very differently. When organizations get caught in situations like this, the initial explanation matters enormously. It tells you whether you are dealing with a mistake or a cover-up. And the Indiana Fever's initial explanation did not suggest a mistake. Scott Agnes, the franchise's primary credentialed beat reporter, a journalist whose information flows directly through the organization's official communication channels, reported that he was told Clark's absence was part of a strategic management plan for the season. Read those words slowly. A strategic management plan. That phrase does not describe a player waking up in pain on game morning and the medical staff making a reactive call. A strategic management plan, by its very definition, is a premeditated decision. It is something that was discussed in advance, agreed upon by multiple people with organizational authority, and scheduled for execution on a specific date. If that characterization is accurate, and it came directly from inside the organization, then the Indiana Fever knew before the 5 o'clock deadline that Caitlin Clark was not going to play in that game. They knew and they said nothing. That is not a procedural lapse. That is a deliberate choice to withhold information that the league's own rules required them to disclose, and they made that choice during the window of time that allowed them to complete their full pregame revenue cycle before anyone found out. The money came in first. The truth came out after. And then Stephanie White walked to the podium. This is the moment that transforms a quiet investigation into a full-blown institutional crisis, because what White said in that post-game press conference is not merely a different emphasis or a softer framing of the same underlying facts. It is a direct, documentable contradiction of what the organization's own communication infrastructure had already told the public. White said, plainly and on the record, that Clark woke up with some soreness. She said the player is healthy. And then she said, and this is the part that matters most, we are not managing anything. We are not managing anything. Compare that to strategic management plan. You cannot read both of those statements and conclude that they are describing the same set of facts. A strategic management plan and we are not managing anything are not two ways of saying the same thing with different vocabulary. They are mutually exclusive characterizations of reality. If one is true, the other is definitionally false. And both of them came from the same organization on the same night about the same situation. That is not spin. That is not messaging coordination that got a little sloppy. That is two completely different stories being told simultaneously, and the evidence of both is sitting in the public record where anyone, including league investigators, can read it side by side. The press conference gave investigators even more material to work with. A reporter, doing exactly the job that credentialed journalism exists to do, asked White directly why Clark had not appeared on the mandatory pre-game injury report, especially given that she had not participated in practice before the game. White's response suggested that players missing practice without appearing on an injury report was a routine, unremarkable occurrence. If that characterization is accurate, it is its own separate problem, because the CBA does not include a carve-out for routine practice absences when those absences relate to a player's availability for an upcoming game. If missing practice without triggering a reporting obligation has genuinely become normalized inside that organization, then the league office has an independent reason to examine the franchise's broader reporting practices, not just what happened on the night of the Portland game. The reporter wasn't finished. When they pushed for specific medical information about the nature of Clark's back condition, White declined to provide details and directed the inquiry to the training staff. Pause on that for a second. The head coach who just told the room that her player is healthy and that the organization is not managing anything simultaneously declined to describe what was physically wrong with that same player. She couldn't provide specifics. She pointed journalists toward people who weren't in the room. And she did all of this while the organization's own beat reporter had already told the public that a strategic management plan existed. A coach who is genuinely confident in the accuracy of her organization's stated explanation does not respond to follow-up questions by deflecting and redirecting. Confidence in a clean story produces specifics. Uncertainty about a story's internal consistency produces exactly the kind of vague redirection White offered that night. But the exchange that will define this story for a long time came near the end of that press conference. A reporter asked Stephanie White directly, on camera, on the record, whether she believed the Indiana Fever could be fined by the WNBA for not listing Caitlin Clark on the injury report. It was a precise, professional, entirely fair accountability question. It was the kind of question that the league's own transparency rules exist to invite. White's response was 2 words. No, thank you. That's it. No elaboration. No acknowledgement of the question's legitimacy. No indication that she had considered the implications of what she was dismissing. No, thank you, delivered with visible and documentable dismissiveness toward a professional journalist asking about a documented potential violation that affected thousands of fans and multiple commercial partnerships the league depends on. Think about who was watching that footage. Commissioner Engelbert's office saw it. The league's sports betting partners, whose contractual relationships with the WNBA are built on the assumption that player availability information will be reported accurately and on time, saw it. Every other franchise in the league that complies with a 5 o'clock deadline as a non-negotiable operational standard saw it. Owners around the league who have invested in building this sport's credibility saw it. The phrase "no, thank you" is not just a coaching opinion. It is a publicly documented characterization of the league's enforcement authority. It communicates that Stephanie White did not regard the reporting requirement as something that applied to her franchise in a meaningful, enforceable way. It communicates that the question of accountability was so unserious to her that it didn't even warrant a full sentence in response. When a head coach expresses that level of dismissal toward league rules on camera, the enforcement calculus shifts entirely. This is no longer about one game. It is no longer about one missed deadline. It is about whether the WNBA's reporting requirement is a genuine institutional standard that applies to everyone or a selectively enforced administrative technicality that powerful franchises can ignore when compliance is financially inconvenient. The league does not find teams to punish them for past behavior. It finds teams to establish that the rules are real and to signal to every other franchise what happens when they aren't followed. When a head coach publicly signals that she doesn't believe those rules are real, the only possible institutional response that preserves the league's credibility is to demonstrate, unmistakably, that they are. Then came the most quietly damning evidence of all, and it didn't come from a press conference or a leaked recording. It came from the Indiana Fever's own injury report for the next game. Following the Portland controversy, following the wave of reporting and scrutiny and documented contradictions, the Fever officially listed Caitlin Clark as out for the upcoming matchup against the Golden State Valkyries. And they did it well in advance, in full compliance with the reporting timeline they had declined to follow for the Portland game.